Hi, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar as we dive into cybersecurity in 2022, lessons learned, and how the pros are preparing. I'm Mary Beth Hamilton, Vice President of Marketing here at Dataprise, and I'm going to run through a few housekeeping items before we kick it over to our esteemed presenters. So next, on the housekeeping front, just some logistical items. The webinar will run about 30 to 45 minutes, depending on how many questions we get from our attendees. You will get a copy of the recording post-event. And at this point, as you heard, you are in listen-only mode, but we would love questions. So please take a moment to submit them via the Q&A function on the GoToWebinar module. And additionally, at the very end of the survey, or at the very end of the webinar, before you leave, we're going to have a very brief survey on any topics you might be interested in hearing from us in 2022. So we would greatly appreciate it if you took a moment to answer that, because we want to make sure that we bring content that is valuable. So now let me give you a brief intro on Dataprise in case you don't know us. We were founded back in 1995, and today we are the leading strategic IT solution provider to organizations across the United States. And our focus is on delivering technology solutions that enable all of our clients to be the best at what they can be. We believe that we deliver unbeatable IT solutions and services that range from managed cybersecurity, hence this discussion today, to network, infrastructure, collaboration, end user, and managed mobility services that are delivered via one of our key partners in recent acquisitions, Wireless Watchdogs. So now let me introduce to you who our speakers are. First, we have Stephen Jones, who you'll here referred to as Jones. He's our Senior Director of Cybersecurity here at Dataprise and is responsible for the strategic design, management, execution, and all things associated with our managed security services. He is a veteran in the industry and security operations. He brings 20 plus years of experience and an incredibly deep expertise in all things technical and strategic related to cyber. Also joining me is Dave Schwartz, who's the SVP and GM over at Wireless Watchdogs, which, as noted, is a Dataprise company. Wireless Watchdogs is a leading provider of mobility managed services and MDM solutions. Together, we joined forces earlier in the year to provide our respective clients a broader solutions portfolio. So that is all I get to do today. I'm now going to kick it over to Dave to kick off the conversation and get us going. So Dave, over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Mary Beth, for that intro. Jones, I'm excited and look forward to jumping in here with you. What I wanted to do was sort of have a little bit of a Q&A on a bunch of hot topics around cyber trends for this upcoming year. And I guess I'll kind of just jump into it with what our first question is. But what as you see up on the board, what industries do you see as being the largest targets for cyber in 2022?
That's a great question, and one that we're seeing play out right before our eyes right now at the tail end of 2021. I think there's a couple of industries that are going to be very big targets moving forward. We're starting to see that now. Supply chain is not an industry necessarily. There's lots of different industries that kind of fit under there, but organizations that provide key pieces of software, services, applications, things like that, I think are certainly going to be very big. MSPs are another one for kind of the same reason. These two organizations, I think, really are related in a way that they're a single entity that often has connections to much larger groups of entities. And so for that reason, I think the overall effort is definitely more worth it for an attacker to try and compromise something like an MSP to get at the hundreds or thousands of customers that sit under that MSP. We're seeing this play out very much right now with the Log4j vulnerability. This is a piece of software that has been used in millions of different applications, projects, and a single vulnerability now has this worldwide ripple across many different organizations because it was kind of the de facto error logging package that's been used in development for a number of years. So I would say definitely anybody that's providing those core capabilities, MSPs, hospitals are another one that I think are probably going to be a big target moving forward, largely because they are such a sensitive function, and there's a lot of valuable information there. All of these things that are typically targeted are worth lots of money on the dark web and to folks who are looking to exploit that, as well as hospitals have that pesky function of never being able to be shut down, right? Because they're very life-saving, critical things that they provide. So I think that's another reason that we'll see hospitals and healthcare in general be a huge target.
Sure. So what you're ultimately saying is any company that serves as sort of a middleman into many organizations are probably the targets for due to the impact and disruption that an attack could actually have on all the companies in which they support. Am I summarizing that correctly?
Yeah, no, absolutely. You hit the nail right on the head, Dave. And I mean, even through this year, we've seen a big uptick in that. Kaseya was another very notable event. This is a software company that provides a service to a bunch of other, largely MSPs, but some direct-to-customer stuff as well. And compromising Kaseya got those attackers access to thousands of customers to push ransomware to.
Sure.
So yeah, I expect that trend to absolutely continue and pick up.
Okay, that's helpful. I appreciate that. And so as we sort of move on with the next question, what do you sort of see as a disturbing trend for cyber criminals to gain access to environments? Things that are newer or less talked about at the moment, but on the radar.
I think the most disturbing thing that I've seen, and it's brilliant in how nefarious it is, as much as I hate to give credit to something like this being genius or particularly clever, but we're starting to see a really disturbing trend of attackers actually kind of abandoning the external hacking of an environment, trying to compromise an environment from the outside in, looking for vulnerabilities that traditionally the way this has always had to be done. We're starting to see a trend where attackers are actually going direct to employees and just offering them cash for their credentials. And again, I saw your chuckle there. It's nefarious and kind of how stupid simple it is. But we're actually seeing cases reported, employees being prosecuted for things like this. $10,000 in this economy at this time of year. These things are, very enticing to employees. And attackers actually have a very easy job because there's services out there that collect names and all this information about these people. LinkedIn, for example, all your employees are there with your brand associated with them, and so it makes it very easy to gather a targeted list of folks who may be open to doing something like that. Glassdoor is another one to kind of look at how disgruntled people may be. So to me, that's, I think, one of the most disturbing trends I've seen is just that they're going direct to the end user and $10,000 for your username and password, and we'll call it a day.
Wow, that is really incredibly frightening. And I'd imagine just with the state of the country as it is and the great quit or resignation or whatever the term is that we want to assign to it, the level of employee dissatisfaction is unfortunately at an all-time high, meaning the susceptibility to organizations is elevated.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think you're always going to have that risk no matter what, even in the best of times. There's always somebody that's unhappy. A large enough company is going to have a certain percentage. But I think you're right. Right now, there's a lot of just unrest and general unease. And with, the economic situation the way it is, those types of things, $10,000 to a state-run cyber group is nothing. And that could get them some seriously damaging credentials to some organization. So, yeah.
Sure. Wow, crazy times. So let me pivot a little bit, moving on to our next question. I wanted to touch on ZTNA, and what are the security benefits of using that over, the traditional VPN that we're all accustomed to today?
Yeah, so
and maybe if you could actually, I was going to say, maybe start off with what ZTNA is. That would be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a great question, and this really ties in very neatly with all of the stuff we've talked about so far in this webinar. So ZTNA may be a new term for some people, zero trust network access or network architecture. This is not actually a new concept. This concept has been around since the 90s. It was called deperimeterization back then. And it's really a new take or a new-ish take on how we've traditionally done networks. Networks historically have kind of assumed if you have a username and a password, you belong there. And that was kind of the only barrier to accessing resources in a network. ZTNA actually removes the entire concept of trust from everything in networking. It does not trust the user, it does not trust a device, and it does not trust the network implicitly. So what this means in short is that in a ZTNA architecture, there are constant checks being done, constant validation being done for a user. And so it's really enforcing least privilege, and it's using contextual information to make decisions about allowing a user to access a resource. So in the past, regardless of how many bad things you've done in a traditional network, as long as you had a valid username and password, you can access resources. With zero trust, there's lots of other, again, contextual checks. If it notices you're doing things that appear to be malicious, it can actually, on the fly, restrict your access to things. It can prompt for additional credentials. And so it's really adding context into, it removes trust, adds context into the overall idea of networking. So that's what ZTNA is. Some benefits of using ZTNA over a traditional VPN. The traditional VPN is really an encrypted communications channel. That's kind of, if you dumb it down to its bare bones, it's just an encrypted comms channel. It doesn't have the ability to really judge what's going on within that communications channel. Now, there are some technologies out there that do have some limited capabilities for that. But it assumes, again, if you use a username and password to access a VPN tunnel into some environment, the general concept is you get access through that tunnel into the environment, end of story. Sure. With ZTNA, it again adds that contextual overlay. It can profile the device you're using and make decisions based on that, whether this device is trusted, whether it's compliant with the applications that we say you need to have, things like endpoint security. It could be OS version or patching level. It can make determinations based on where you're accessing something from, based on time of day. If we know that Dave Schwartz only accesses things between these hours, but today he's over here in this off-hour period, we can make decisions based on that context and restrict Dave's access to certain things. So that's the big benefit, is context, removing the trust from the equation, and having much finer control over what users have access to. This is a deny by default arrangement.
Got it. So it's ultimately, in short, quarantining any device until it assesses that it has the right to access whatever information or content or applications are necessary. And then once it's authorized, pushing those out and giving access to the network?
Kind of, yes, but it's also every time you're accessing a resource, it's revalidating that you're supposed to be there. It's
Oh,
also
interesting.
double checking what has this account done in the past X amount of minutes, and are those things consistent with what this user should be doing? So it's really that constant monitoring. It's literally being under a microscope with every action and everything that you're doing being assessed in real time to determine if what you're doing is potentially malicious, harmful. This is a technology that is really going to stop nefarious lateral movement in the network for security incidents.
Awesome, that's cool. It's much more actively monitored and less passive than, unfortunately, I think some of the tools that have existed historically.
100%, yes.
Yep. Okay, cool. And so as we move on, the next question I wanted to ask you was specifically, what's the difference between ZTNA and SASE?
So Zero Trust Network Architecture, ZTNA, SASE is how we say the acronym.
SASE.
Secure Access Service Edge is the full name for that. These two are actually related. SASE is actually an implementation of the ZTNA concept. And what SASE is, so ZTNA is the higher level concepts of removing trust, constant contextual authorization of things. SASE is actually the software implementation of those concepts. So there are several providers out there that can set up SASE environments. And what this is kind of stringing together a variety of endpoint products to create a service, a network-based service. The things that are, for example, checking for device profiles. You can have DNS filtering in here, right? We've typically used an agent that sits on something like a Cisco umbrella. We can actually embed that at the network layer in a SASE implementation and take care of that function there. We can do everything from profile management to CASB functions. All of that baked into a software stack that is the practical application of the ZTNA concept.
Got it. Okay, that's helpful. Appreciate that. And so, moving into a bit more of my world for a second on the mobile side of things, what impact does ZTNA have on a mobile workforce, which obviously over the last year and a half has been more prevalent than ever before?
Yeah, absolutely. I think ZTNA and SASE implementations are going to be the biggest improvement in mobile security for the workforce or for an enterprise that we've seen rolled out to date. And I think the big reason there is because, as I mentioned before, we can profile that device. I can see if this is an authorized device to be accessing the environment. I'm automatically locked into, again, least privilege. We're limiting the lateral movement of what that device can do and access. And we're really watching contextually for what this device has been doing. So the thing that makes this really powerful for mobile is, one, there are so many mobile devices. As we work from home, we're shifting to more and more mobile access applications. And those mobile devices, though, can be lost or stolen or used by somebody nefarious. And historically, again, using traditional networking models, VPN, for example, it would assume just that device connected, it uses the correct username and password. So of course, let it in, let it do what it's going to do. But with a SASE or ZTNA implementation here, we can actually, again, profile this. We can constantly evaluate what's going on. We can push a whole host of things to this, and even still allow users to do work. Say they're their phone's broken and they have to use their iPad for something, we can contextually pick up on that and allow them maybe some reduced functionality to do business critical things, like maybe just check their email, but not allow them to access file shares and other services because we don't know what this device is. So there's a lot of flexibility there, but again, I think this is probably the biggest improvement in really providing monitored, structured, controlled access through mobile devices for an enterprise network that we've seen to date.
Sure. So it almost sounds like, and I think this is always important when we look at tools used in business. Not only are you adding a significant layer of protection from a cyber standpoint, but you're really also empowering users. So in the example that you just gave, someone has to use a temporary device that they're not a customer typically set up to utilize. Leveraging ZTNA will actually empower them to still be able to do their job with very limited downtime in theory.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It does open a whole host of flexible options while at the same time really relying on structured policies that we can build into platforms like this to allow users to do things from unknown devices, say the hotel's business center machine. We certainly would never want that touching our network. You have to assume that's the dirtiest thing ever. But say you've got an executive on the road, something's wrong with the laptop, they need to be able to access something, we can push them into a secure portal where they can do some things, some very limited things that won't ultimately impact the network, but still allows them to get things done. And all of this is happening transparently in the background. All of these additional checks, this additional contextual information, all happens in the background. They never see it, they never interact with it. So in a lot of ways, I do think it is empowering for the workforce to let them get their things done while the system's really taking care of the heavy lifting.
Sure. Cool. And so moving on, I wanted to ask a question that I feel like with the number of cyber incidents happening right now is a very hot point of discussion. How has the overall attitude around cyber insurance shifted because of all these cyber incidents that are occurring? What feels like weekly, if not daily, at this point?
Yeah, no, this is a terrific question. I love talking about this because there's a radical change in the way people view cyber insurance, the way cyber insurance views their customers, and how they're supporting things. I think the biggest shift that we've seen in the past year or two has really been the change in the attitude for organizations that kind of used cyber insurance as a stopgap for actually implementing proper cyber programs. A lot of folks basically kind of used it as a get out of jail free card because the cyber insurance premium may have been cheaper than actually standing up an actual full-blown cyber program. And it was, the attitude is kind of, and I've heard this throughout my career for a while, is kind of, if something happens, it's cheaper for me to pay this premium or the deductible for the cyber insurance policy to get the thing fixed, whatever it is. And you can't do that anymore. It's actually no longer optional because of the large scale events that have happened, not only in the cyber world, but in the real physical world. These insurance companies are the same insurance companies that are covering things like the wildfires in California. They lost entire zip codes of houses and properties and tangible property. And those affect these same companies as a whole. So there's lots of reasons why cyber insurance has become harder to get. That's certainly some of them. The increase in high profile incidents has been another. The number of claims that came out of the Kaseya situation and other high profile cyber incidents has also shifted the market. This just wasn't a thing. There weren't thousands and thousands of people putting claims in for a single type of incident before. So I think that has shifted the way cyber insurance companies view risk and the risk that they're willing to take on. I've seen and heard that there are lots of little carve-outs now in policies for certain types of technologies. If you're running certain types of technologies and those things are compromised, they're not covered. They've gotten, the cyber insurance has gotten very much like health insurance in the pre-existing condition capacity, and in having certain things that they are very risk averse to. So being able to not have a fully functioning cyber program and rely on your cyber insurance, that's also not a thing anymore. They want to make sure you're doing your due diligence to reduce their risk. So getting, for anybody that in the last probably 18 months, 24 months has tried to apply for cyber insurance, they are much more rigorous with the questions they're asking, proving that you're doing everything in your capacity to reduce risk. An example of this is, and to touch on the mobile thing, Dave, to keep this, very relevant.
Sure.
A mobile device, if you have cyber insurance and you have corporate issued mobile devices, if that mobile device is not encrypted and it is lost and used as a vector, an attacker uses that lost or stolen mobile phone to gain access to your network, there are absolutely cyber insurance companies out there that will not cover that incident because you did not do due diligence in reducing the risk of that device. That's one example. Not every cyber insurance company is that way. I'm kind of speaking anecdotally from stuff we've seen. But this is kind of the new attitude. It is all about risk reduction with cyber insurance companies, because paying these very large claims thousands of times over across the globe has really changed their attitude quite a bit.
Sure. So I guess I see two big things that come out of this topic, referencing back to what we talked about at the beginning, that, what are the trends for 2022 and attacks looking like they'll hit, these sort of middleman companies like MSPs or healthcare companies or whatever it may be, because of the repercussions behind the scenes. The susceptibility for the cyber insurance companies is significantly larger with the size of these attacks that are occurring. So is it safe to assume that with that aligned with just the reality is that even the best technologies out there are susceptible to an attack, meaning the carve-outs in these insurance policies that list will get bigger and bigger over time? Is that what you're expecting?
I actually do expect that, absolutely. I expect probably instead of listing specific technologies, they will probably find ways to create blanket statements around certain types of things. But for now, I've actually seen very specific carve-outs. If you use this company's this product and it is compromised, that is a non-covered incident, or you cannot submit a claim against that. So for now, I think that list is small enough, it's easy to maintain. As this gets larger, I do think they'll find ways to reapproach to have more blanket statements or umbrella statements that cover a wide variety of things.
Sure. So the carve-out list will get bigger or more general, and then the requirements to obtain cyber insurance will become significantly more robust from where it is today.
Yeah, I absolutely believe that that will happen.
Right.
And it's happening now. It's much harder to get, much harder to keep.
Sure. And appreciate that. I think it's a very important topic, and I think something that's very much underappreciated, the significance of the change that's occurring in the moment. Moving on, what do you sort of see as priorities that companies should place on reducing their ransomware attacks or the ransomware attack risk in 2022?
Sure. This is a great question because ransomware continues to be a very common attack that we're seeing because it's just so effective. The biggest thing for reducing risk of suffering a ransomware attack is to prevent that ransomware from executing in the first place. So I'll kind of work from the outside in. From the outside perspective, you're going to want to make sure that we're preventing that ransomware from running. So this means next-gen antivirus that's capable of detecting things like this. That needs to be on every critical asset you can possibly have it on. If you can stop that from executing in the first place, ransomware doesn't happen. So that's kind of step number one. Number two is to prevent that lateral movement. Ransomware gets there a variety of ways, and being able to propagate across your network, that lateral movement. Again, we talked about how ZTNA and SASE can help with that. By looking for contextual information about how things are happening and determining when to turn accounts off or prevent actions. And then all the way on the inside, we've got things like your backups. This is the thing that we probably see the most when it comes to ransomware attacks, is that companies did not have backups in place, or that while they may have, they were not really done in the most effective manner. We had a customer recently that was making backups, but they were backed up on site somewhere, and the attackers got there to the backups and encrypted all of that as well. So best practice is to put this stuff off-prem in a cloud somewhere, mutable backups in the cloud, so that they can't do that. But having backups is the thing that's going to save your bacon more than most. If that ransomware does actually execute and you do have files that are encrypted, you're either paying a ransom or you're restoring from backup. So I would say having that in place, and then of course tangential to that is your business continuity, disaster recovery. If the worst happens and your business is succumbed to a ransomware attack, how does your business function if you don't have access to critical files or to critical systems, or if all the revenue is stopped because your services are down? Just the other day, Saturday, Kronos Private Cloud, right? Kronos is the parent company for UKG, which is a very big HRIS provider. They do time management, time card entries. They were compromised on Saturday, and 3 of their largest global services are completely shut down. And the company's explanation is that it was a ransomware attack and that recovery is not possible, is what they're telling people. So there are companies all over the planet that rely on UKG's time management capability, and it's gone. It's not coming back. It's completely gone.
Wow.
So that is a wake-up call to a lot of companies. I've seen a lot of panicked Reddit posts about companies that are kind of dead in the water now, with hundreds of thousands of employees or tens of thousands of employees that were using that for scheduling and for timekeeping, and it doesn't exist anymore. And it will never come back. So, these are real big factors. This happens every single day. This happens to big companies and small companies. Dataprise has worked a number of these ransomware cases. And the best case scenario is always where the customer says, we have a mutable offline backup, we just need help restoring. So that, I think, should be your biggest priorities from the outside in. Make sure it doesn't run, have your backups, and have a plan for what to do, should this happen or when this happens.
Sure. So, and really it's not enough to just have just a really strong cyber security solution in place and program. You need to be planned, have a really strong plan for what happens if that, if something gets through, right? So to your point, the backups and BCDR and what does that whole plan look like? It's not just this front-facing cyber piece, it's what happens if someone finds a way in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm actually glad you brought that up, Dave, because I've got a real world example of why just having that cyber capability isn't always enough. In the Kaseya example, that service was compromised, and the ransomware that was pushed out through that attack was pushed direct through that Kaseya service to customers of MSPs and customers that were using that platform. Kaseya is a trusted product and is a product that there wasn't a capability to kind of monitor for that transaction. We assumed things were pushing with Kaseya are there because we put them there. So the fact that an attacker was able to compromise that service and to push that ransomware direct to end user computers meant that it bypassed a lot of the computer network defense capability. Now, there were endpoint technologies out there that were able to stop it from actually executing, but not everybody had those. So having just a C&D capability or cybersecurity capability is not enough by itself. Again, we have to be comprehensive in this day and age, so we do need to have our incident response plans, our BCBR planning. We need to have things like backup. We need to be thinking about least privilege and ZTNA and SASE, and all of these things together are what we need to be focusing on.
Sure. No, there's a tremendous amount of strategy that needs to go into ensuring that your organization is fully protected and covered, moving past the protection piece, just covered if there were an incident to occur. Yeah, totally makes sense. So I want to be a little cautious on time, since I know we said this would take about 45 minutes. Do you have any last sort of final thoughts or points that you wanted to revisit?
Look, I think my final thoughts in this are this stuff is extremely serious. If we hit a chord with anybody today over anything we discussed, if you're kind of sitting there thinking, wow, I wonder if our backup strategy is robust enough. When's the last time we tested the restoration of a backup? We witnessed that recently with a client as well who had backups, and when it came time to actually use them to restore, they realized that they were encrypted backups, and the employee who had done that no longer worked there anymore, and it wasn't written down anywhere. Only that one person knew how to get into them, so their backups were useless. So these are all the things, again, documentation. If we hit a chord with you guys on anything that we talked about here today, please take this seriously. This is a very big, very pervasive problem, and it takes a lot of strategy. It takes a lot of planning. It takes a lot of testing, and this is something that is a when it happens, not an if it happens. You will have a security incident, whether it's ransomware, whether it's a state-sponsored attack against your company. No company is too small. I still hear that today, and at tail into 2021, my company is too small. Nobody cares about us. It's not true. They absolutely do care about you, and you are absolutely a target. So my final thought is, please take it seriously. If you have not put the time and necessary resource into making sure that you've got a plan, that you've thought through your weaknesses, your vulnerabilities, please take the time to do that and start 2022 strong with all of the protections and mitigations in place that will buy you the most time and most protection for your business.
Very, very well said. I couldn't agree more. And I appreciate that. So before we end this, I'd love to just open this up for questions. I know that we had one that was submitted just before this started, and to the audience that's out there, if there's any additional questions, please feel free to submit them. But one that did come through was, what are the best practices for integrating emerging security technologies into your environment?
So that's a great question. Emerging security technologies can be awesome because they have lots of new functionality, new capabilities, new ways of solving old problems. But emerging security technologies are also relatively new, nascent, unknown. So they can come along with vulnerabilities that aren't immediately known or aware. So I always am a little bit cautious about putting emerging things, brand new things, into production environments because sometimes they're not completely fully understood. I'm definitely not a huge early adopter when it comes to some of those things, but there is a time and a place for testing those things, for putting them through the correct assessments to ensure that they comply with what you need them to comply with. But I would say, certainly look at those, identify how they fit into your strategy, identify how they fit into the overall big picture of your security architecture. But certainly test them, make sure that you've got them correctly configured, and that you are assessing their impact to your environment. So with anything emerging, always put it under a microscope before you trust or rely on it too much.
Sure, I 100% agree. And also vetting, the stability of the organization that built that technology to begin with.
Sure.
Cool. So let's go ahead and wrap this up. Jones, thank you so much for doing this with me. This has been a tremendous amount of fun. Really enjoyed it. I hopefully gave a lot of really valuable information to those listening and joining today. Sort of a next step, if anybody's interested, we start with a scoping call around cybersecurity. It's just a really good way to understand, from a baseline perspective where you're at. And so if that's something of interest to anybody, contact your account manager, whether you're a Watchdogs client, a Dataprise client, or you're brand new to joining us. Great point to start with. Jones, again, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I look forward to doing another one with you soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Dave. Thanks for having me.
Cool. Take care.